Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's virtual panel discussion focusing on education as a tool for rehabilitation in prison and as an essential component for reentry for our formerly incarcerated people. This is the first in a series of 8 virtual panel discussions hosted by Nebraskans for Prison Reform and Stand In for Nebraska. These panels are scheduled to occur bi-weekly between now and mid-October, and the series will focus on a variety of topics related to mass incarceration and prison reform, including the issue of youth in our prison system, rehabilitation, reentry, restorative justice, and others. We hope that you will join us for all of our future conversations. My name is Dr. Rashani Reese. I'm a public speaker for ending life sentencing, an advocate for restorative justice practices, and I am your facilitator for this evening's discussion. A few logistics before we move forward. So all attendees who are joining us, you are all automatically muted. Your video is not turned on, but any questions that you have can be submitted via the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please feel free to private message our Zoom host, Ashley, from Nebraska's for Prison Reform. And you may have noticed that tonight's conversation is streaming on Facebook and also being recorded and will be available for future viewing. Without further ado, allow me to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. We have with us tonight Dustin Pendley. Dustin is a coordinator for the Transform, Renew, Achieve, Connect program, also known as TRAC, at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Dustin will be speaking about providing education to currently incarcerated individuals and TRAC's work on creating solutions to assist in successful reentry back to the communities. Diane Good-Collins. Diane is the director of the reentry program at the Metropolitan Community College in Nebraska, working on their 180 reentry assistance program, which provides skills, education, and support and mentoring for our returning citizens. Gary Damasi. Gary works with the Prison Fellowship Academy inside Nebraska's prisons, delivering classes focused on trauma and other related subjects. And last but not least, we have with us Cory Miller, who is a chief advisor for the Stonecatchers Society, a group that is active in both Iowa and Nebraska that seeks to promote a fairer, more effective justice system. Each of our panelists are going to speak for approximately 10 to 15 minutes, and we will close out tonight's conversation with a Q&A session at the very end, but feel free to drop your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen throughout the discussion. Our moderator is Jason Whitmere from Stand In for Nebraska. He will be tracking all of your questions and facilitating the Q&A session at the very end. Now let's turn the mic over to our first panelist, Dustin. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that introduction. Thanks, Ashley and Maeve and Jason for asking me to participate in this. I do have to say I'm not the coordinator of the TRAC program. I just kind of a nuisance. I just make myself involved with it. I'm coordinator in the English department at UNO, but I can definitely speak to the TRAC program. And I'm just going to show some slides because I could easily just, get off track. So that's going to be best for all of us. All right. So we're looking here, just sort of the name TRAC, transforming, renewing, achieving, and connecting. It makes a nice acronym. We came up with this. The community of practice was having a retreat, and we just really wanted to have some positive important characteristics, to be associated with the name. And the word TRAC you can do a lot with that. It's just a really, it's a word that has a lot of images that goes along with it as well. And so thinking about TRAC sort of in the center here, the most important thing to date has been our UNO 4-credit classes at the Omaha Correctional Center. But we have also worked to organize a formerly incarcerated student organization Ultimately, the idea is to have a safe space to, for the students at Omaha Correctional Center when they are landing on campus to be a part of. And then we also have a community of practice, which I had mentioned, and then we have community symposia where we hope to do educational events, sort of, like this for the community. What we're looking at here, I wrote something a while ago about this, but so unfortunately, there's not an accurate record of the socioeconomic class makeup of Nebraska's prison population. I think we can safely assume that wealthy people do not make up the bulk of the prison population, though. What we can see when we look at this slide is the educational disparity. What we're looking at is formerly incarcerated people who are participating in vocational life skill programming are practically equal to the general population for high school completion, but they are significantly underrepresented when it comes to attaining a bachelor's degree or higher. This is important, profoundly important, because in Nebraska and nationally, the best indicator that a formerly incarcerated person will not recidivate is attainment of higher education. A RAND study found that incarcerated persons who participate in correctional education programs had a 43% lower odds of recidivating than those who did not. Another study indicated that 24% increase in likelihood of gaining employment if the incarcerated person engages in prison education. So there's a lot of data that's been compiled. So obviously higher education is important. And so TRAC definitely has some objectives, increase levels of academic competence, increase educational attainment, improve prison safety. That's just, the prison wants to hear that. It's true. Increase self-esteem, self-awareness, independence, emotional stability, stable relationships, of course, reduce recidivism rates and improve employment opportunities and higher earnings post-incarceration. And I think a lot of times, society gets so fixated on reentry and post-incarceration, but TRAC and higher education programs are holistic in their thought and realize what's valuable and important is the student, even while they're incarcerated, of course they still matter. And so, this fourth bullet point here is extremely important. And we're hoping to provide an opportunity to allow for creativity and intellectual fervor, and that's the objectives that we have. Just some idea, it's a donor funded program, so I'm going to give you a link. If you're compelled, you can donate. We've offered 17 classes from fall of 2017 to spring of 2021, and we've offered a variety of classes that are all for college credit that can all be used. A lot of them could be used at any university, and that's the whole idea of a general education credits. 165 distinct headcount of students, 495 student credit hours. And what's really, I think this is really cool too. 2 students from the very first class we offered are currently in graduate programs at UNO. One of them is studying criminal justice at the graduate level, and the other just was accepted into a Master of Fine Arts program. And that's just seeing the power of giving someone an opportunity to shine. And so some student testimonials, I'm making progress in my academic career. This will affect my life for its remainder and the lives of those I come into contact with, especially my family. There's just a real hunger inside for something that's worthwhile and fulfilling. And it's an opportunity. Faculty, it's always, whenever a faculty member has the opportunity to teach inside, it's always the best experience that they have or will have. That was my experience. I had an opportunity to teach a class in the summer of 2019, and I was just blown away by the preparedness the depth of our conversations, the writing abilities, and it was just it was a real joy for me. And so the other section of TRAC is the community symposia that we've offered. And our first one, Diane was actually, Good Collins was on our second panel of that. It was a great event. We had a keynote speaker of Dominique Morgan, and then last year we had a couple of virtual symposia. We can't get enough of Diane. She's the best. And we had Jasmine Harris as well and Raquel Henderson. And then in the second one, we looked at COVID and incarceration. So these are just designed to give the community an opportunity to, be a part of and understand the importance of higher education in prison, the importance of 90% of the people incarcerated or more are going to be returning to communities. So it's just really important that we're all in this together, essentially, and we want to have empathy for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. TRAC students, and I noticed that there were a couple of our students who were in the formerly incarcerated group in attendance today. They are amazing students, hard workers, gifted, brilliant, intelligent, all across. So we started right before the pandemic, and we've had monthly meetings. Some of the highlights of our monthly meetings, we met with community members to plan to testify for the LB 114 Clean Slate Act. We met with this student, Ryan Rising, who's an active member of Underground Scholars in California. We met with Jared, who works for the city of Omaha, encouraged business to hire formerly incarcerated. And then finally, last month or two, we were able to get inside and meet with currently incarcerated students and their hunger to start setting up some sort of, plan, right? So that they can earn a bachelor's degree. And then we also did a couple of webinars. And then finally, I probably already used my time, but, future plans. We have 2 classes planned at OCC in the fall. We have an art 2050 survey of Western art, and then a writer's workshop 1500 introduction to creative writing. We're really excited about Pell's expansion, finally getting away from this, the unnecessary starvation of access to college in prisons. And then I plan to teach an Inside Out class in the spring. I'm really excited about that, where we'll be bringing in UNO students who are on campus to have a class with incarcerated students, and to really, I'm just going to step back and then, just facilitate, and they're going to delve into really rich topics. And it's going to, ultimately everyone's going to benefit from that experience. We'll continue to have large in-person events in the spring for our symposium, and you're all invited to present. So hopefully everyone puts in, a presentation. And then TRAC students, we hope to have monthly in-person meetings with currently incarcerated students. Hope to present at NCHEP. We've been putting together a proposal that's the National Conference for Higher Education in Prison, and then continue to have community engagement events. And then with Maeve being a part of the group, dabble with policy, because that's what matters. That's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dustin. You had a lot more time. And so even though we're generally saving the Q&A for the end, okay, since you wrapped up and our attendees are curious, we had 2 people ask the same question, which is essentially, are there plans to expand this to other prisons in Nebraska? Maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Well, I would say that in Lincoln, so the donors who funded the program, they also have instructors who've taught at the University of Nebraska, have taught some classes. I know there was a sociology class by Dr. Her name is escaping me right now, but I know Fran K taught an English class, and then there was another class. So definitely Lincoln, it hasn't had as much of a, it hasn't has as much interest from instructors yet as UNO has. Definitely Tecumseh is always, on the radar. York makes a lot of sense too. I mean, there's some distance there, and I know Metro goes into York, I believe. So and York. There's a higher ed and prison program from York University that's in the York prison. They actually are part of the Pell grants that were the experiment, the project of Pell grants that happened, and so is Metro. I'm sure Diane will be able to clarify the name of that program. But yeah, definitely. Ultimately, one of our symposium, the title of it was "Crowding Nebraska's Prisons," and so the more people that we can get in the prison who are not currently in state custody, the better, right? And looking at ways to bring in programming. We've met with members from University of Iowa before, and they do a lot of cool things. There's one prison, there's a choir, and that I was like, how do we get a choir going at OCC? I mean, anything that can be done is huge, right? Because I mean, like, sort of my mindset is we're all in this together, and a lot of time, I mean, the way a lot of times people look at prison is, well, you did what you did, and so this is all on you, and there is no other situation where a person must flounder on their own for one thing that they did and then be subjected to constant pain, right? Having to suffer that all along. So the more people that can get involved to sort of reinvent this whole thing of incarceration, and the better. So the Inside Out, I could talk a little more about that too. That's really exciting. So it's an international program. There have been Inside Out classes all across the globe, and it started in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, and basically like I said, so there'll be a group of students who are taking classes on campus who will have the opportunity to sort of study abroad. I don't know how I feel about talking about it like that, but be able to take classes in prison with the students in there. And so the class that I'm thinking about is sort of a health disparities class, and looking at health disparity, and maybe doing an assignment where all the students do an autoethnography on their health experiences, and to sort of look at that critically, and then look at topics that are in the medical humanities field of addiction, looking at health disparity, obviously, access to medical care, these different topics that are in that, and just to get the different perspectives and try to come up with some solutions. It's been wildly successful across the nation. And there was one, I believe someone at Wayne State or Peru State taught an Inside Out class. So it's been a while ago. I did some Googling and found it.
Great. And is TRAC available in Lincoln? It was a question from
It's Nebraska Post-Secondary Prison Education Project. I'm going to drop in the chat the donor information, and you could definitely donate to both Lincoln and, I mean, it all goes into the same pot.
Great. And we still have a couple more minutes before we move on. A question I wanted you to talk a little bit with our attendees tonight is the topic of resilience and the role that education plays in resilience. And you mentioned it very quickly in your presentation. I think it's so crucial, and I'm sure our other attendees our panelists are going to speak to it also. But the topic of resilience, education as resilience, can you share with me like your experience, what you feel about that?
Well, definitely resilience. It also provides agency. Because so kind of look at it, if I have been convicted of a felony and I've been incarcerated, my agency and power has been stripped, right? And so the more education that I can attain, the more power I now have, right? And then therefore I can go into spaces that maybe I couldn't have gone into before because I could risk reincarceration or shame or, you know, types of things. But the more education now I have knowledge, I have institutional support. I'm a part of a community of scholars and empathetic intellectuals, right? And so their resilience will start to blend with the resilience that you know, a person would have as they're attaining education. And so ultimately, you know, I sort of have this thought of a number of incarcerated persons in Nebraska continuing to earn higher education degrees and then, you know, returning to communities, stabilizing it, being resistant to preventive policing and these types of, you know, profiling that occur, you know, and stable and bringing in their strength, right, which was there all along, but you know, the state took it away, you know, didn't want them to have that power.
That's amazing. Thank you. And so from the psychological research perspective, right, you named two really strong resilience factors, education and agency. And resilience has been studied over 40 or 50 years at this point. And knowing that those are two things that are just generally resilience factors in the world when we apply them to our incarcerated settings, like yes, yes, and yes. Dustin, thank you so much for sharing. And we'll save any questions that come for you for the end. Let's go ahead and move on to our next panelist. Diane, if you could come off mute and share with us, the floor is yours.
Hi. So my name is Diane Good-Collins, and I am the director of the 180 Reentry Assistance Program at Metropolitan Community College. And we have been providing education, higher education inside of the Omaha, well, actually the Omaha Correctional Center since 2014. And prior to that time, we had provided corrections education for decades inside the prisons until 2007. So there was a 7-year lapse where we were out of all of the Nebraska prisons. And then we started introducing college credit classes in 2014, again, just at that one facility, and then morphed to add the Nebraska Correctional Youth Facility, which is a youth prison here in Nebraska. And in 2015, we formalized our reentry program. And since formalizing it in February 2015, we've served 6,620 people with a criminal history. So our focus, of course, is education and training as a community college, but we found out quickly, as Dustin alluded to previously, is that in order for an individual to focus on their education and their educational goals, we have to remove barriers. So I'd say quite holistically created a reentry center, which was very small. And over the last few years, it has exploded, and we now have a new reentry center at Fort Omaha campus, which includes not just the education center, but a job center, a pantry, a computer center, and we are providing transition support for individuals coming out of every institution in the state of Nebraska, and also those that are exiting into Nebraska from federal institutions. So again, our focus was education because, as Dustin said earlier, if somebody participates in just one college credit class, it decreases the likelihood of them returning to prison by 43%. And I understand that experientially because I am a Native American that had access to higher education through my tribe, but I never took that opportunity until I myself was incarcerated in Nebraska Correctional Center for Women. And I took that first college credit class, and speaking to, again, what you were just talking about, Doctor, it changed how I saw myself. It changed my attitude. It changed my behaviors. It changed my self-fulfilling prophecy, like how I deemed my future could look by taking one college credit class. And as I transitioned from that Nebraska Correctional Center for Women to the State Work Release Center here in Omaha, I began coming to Metro's Fort Omaha campus every day. I learned along the way that the more education I attained, the better my future would be. And also that I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get to where I was supposed to be, but I did understand that as I continued to take education and the doors opened up to other opportunities, that as I continued to walk through those doors that were opened up, that I would have a better life. Now, that's been several years later, and I'm the director of the reentry program, and I'm able to show other people who are exiting jail, prison, and treatment centers that it's not over. Because you had that number placed behind your name, it's not over, and that you can have a new life. And I think that that peer mentoring piece, while someone is pursuing their education and employment goals, is very important. I'm not going to restate things that Dustin's already stated. I'm going to focus a little more on some other things. So we have found that offering that peer mentoring support while people are incarcerated and as they transition out into the community beyond the point that they are released is critical. And 80% of our staff have a criminal history. So if an individual comes into our reentry center or approaches us in the prison while we are providing our education training and transition support, they can't say, you don't know what it's like, because yes, we do. We do know what it's like. We have walked through maybe not all of the same barriers, but many similar barriers, and we understand the hesitancy to invest in yourself. And unless you have been in that situation yourself, it's very difficult to understand. But I will say that if the opportunities that are available now were available when I was released, I don't know where I would be. But it's everything that we've created and that I would say UNO has created and other reentry centers have created, it's come far too late. You know, we should have been doing this decades ago. And, you know, I'm still thankful it's there, but I do know that if things would have changed a long time ago, maybe we wouldn't have the mass incarceration issue that we do have right now. So the need, I want to speak a little bit to the need for reentry services, whether inside a prison or on the college campus. We are inside of 7 of the 10 prisons. We provide college credit classes. The majority of our programming is done at Tecumseh State Correctional Institution and at Omaha Correctional Institution. And then it follows to Lincoln Correctional Center, the Community Correctional Center, Lincoln, and the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women in York, Nebraska. There is another higher education facility, higher ed institution, and it is York College, and they're not utilizing Second Chance Pell, they're actually utilizing Vocational Life Skills Fund. So that is a grant, just to clarify, it's a grant through the Department of Corrections, and it was birthed out of LB 907 in 2014. And we are also one of the BLS grantees. So it's a vocational life skills grant that is being utilized by York College in the women's prison. And then Metro is using that in some of the facilities that we provide service at. And then we are utilizing Second Chance Pell at three of our institutions now. So Dustin talked a little bit about that, but basically what Second Chance Pell is an opportunity for an incarcerated person to utilize Pell Grants for direct service, for direct fees. So for tuition and textbooks only. So we have students that utilize it at the Omaha Correctional Center, Tecumseh, and also at the Community Correctional Center, Omaha, so the State Work Release Center. The only students that come to campus are the work release students in Omaha. So when we go to the Work Release Center in Lincoln, we actually bring college credit classes there with a face-to-face instructor. Employment. I'll talk a little bit about employment, because typically when people get out of prison, their first focus is not education. Their first focus is to address their basic needs, and that would be employment. If you don't have a job, you can't buy food, you can't pay your parole fees, you can't pay rent. You have to have money. And so this is why we ended up creating the job center. So in 2020, we served almost 2,000 people in our job center with an 88% employment rate. Now, I want to speak very clearly to the fact that these individuals are not being employed in food service alone. There seems to be a thought that a lot of people getting out of prison go work at McDonald's. Not that there's anything wrong with working at McDonald's, if that's what you choose. However, many of our people are being employed in every industry. And I would say we have partnerships with over 200 employers that are background friendly. Some of them have no problem with us posting their name on flyers on our job board in our job center, but some have what we call the closed door referral, meaning they will only take the referral directly from us. So I think that's pretty amazing, even during the pandemic. So consider that almost 2,000 people were connected to employment that have a criminal history. And as far as our pantry, we have a pantry that helps people connect to food, hygiene, work boots, tools, anything that they could need that would help them to transition successfully. In 2020, we served almost 3,800 people with that support, and it's not going down. In June alone, we served over 420 people with pantry services in 1 month. So I'm not quite sure how we're making it work, but it's working somehow. Our orientation. So an orientation for us would be like an intake into the program. So in 2020, we completed over 850 orientations, but in June alone, for the first 6 months of 2021, we had over 600. So I just don't know how we're going to continue to serve, but we just suit up, show up, and stand ready to serve, and it's working. So I don't know if there's any immediate questions, but I also want to give Cory an opportunity to share his information too.
Beautiful. Diane, there are a couple of questions that come in, and we do have a couple of minutes, so I'd love to toss them to you. So our first question from Linda is again, is this available in Lincoln for reentry, or have just been released? I'm not sure that I get that, but is this available in Lincoln? The same question that was asked about the TRAC program.
So our reentry center is based in Omaha, Nebraska, but we work with anybody in the state of Nebraska. So if you are somebody, we've delivered food hygiene to Lincoln. We will go wherever anybody needs help. If somebody is interested in participating in our forklift training, they'll drive from Lincoln to attend our forklift training. If they're interested in registering in college credit classes, we will do a Zoom, phone call, whatever we need to do to get them registered, determining their career pathway, and get them on the road. If they go to the panhandle of Nebraska and they decide they want to take an online class, we register them, we mail them their book, and we just try to help. We meet them where they're at and just try to meet their needs. While we don't have a reentry center in Lincoln, we are in Lincoln a lot.
Beautiful. And Freedom asks, does reentry program work with Nebraska Youth Correctional Facility? Or are they considered aged out youth?
No. Yes,
Okay.
we do. I understand what she's saying, but yes, we do. We work with NCYF is the acronym for that facility. And we also work with individuals at DCYC, which is the Douglas County Youth Center. So yes.
And how would they attain services through reentry?
So that facility, we had offered college credit classes for some time. We're just regenerating that back at that facility after COVID. And so they would just talk to us or talk to one of the people in education, and they would refer them out to us. So basically they would send what's called an inmate interview request, an IIR. Slang is kite.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
And we do still have two other panelists, but we have a few minutes. I would love to ask you a question, if you wouldn't mind circling back. Thank you for sharing your story, your lived experience. That is crucial. And I'm wondering if maybe you could share a little bit, if you're comfortable, with what was the switch like in terms of the mental switch, not having ever taken a college class, being incarcerated, and then having this experience. Could you say a little bit about what you noticed about the way you were thinking and how it changed through that experience?
Yeah, sure. So initially, when it was, the lady's name was Diane. I'm just going to out her. She worked in education in York, and she stopped me on the yard one day and said, "Hey, I think you should consider taking a college credit class." And initially I was irritated by her because I thought, who are you to tell me what to do first? And why would you say that to me? You know, I didn't say those things to her. I just said, "Oh, thanks," you know, and I walked away. But it started my wheels spinning because I never considered myself college material. If I had, I probably would have used the funding available through my tribe to go to school, right? Well, I started thinking, well, maybe she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. She's an intelligent woman. I respected her. So I thought maybe I should take a chance. So I took that first college credit class. And it wasn't until after I completed that college credit class that I thought, hey, maybe this is something. Like maybe I can do it. And so that first one led to another one. And I don't think like there was this big, huge aha moment, because I pretty much felt the whole time that I was scratching and crawling just to get through. Even when I was at the state work release center and I was supposed to go in front of the board of parole to be released, and I instead went to them and said, "I'd like to extend my stay inside the prison so I can continue education. My tribe will pay for me to go to school. Will you support me to go to Metro?" And they said, well, nobody had ever said that to them before. And I was like, well, I can't believe I'm saying it because I really want to go. But I was trying to do the opposite of what I wanted to do, because I figured that would get me someplace different than where I'd already been, right? So I can see then my thinking had really started to significantly change, but it wasn't just the education. It was other things. It was the spiritual involvement for me with my church. And it was also people in recovery, rooms of recovery, that were helping me to reform the way I thought about not just my education, but also the way I'd been living my life. And that sobriety had to be a real thing for me. So for me, it wasn't just education. And I don't believe it's always just one thing for people. It could be church, education, recovery. It could be your family. It could be a lot of different things. And I think everybody's different. So for us to try to prescribe one thing, I think is probably not reality, but education is a very big component of why things change for me.
That is beautiful and spot on. Many pathways to recovery, many pathways to healing, many pathways to transformation, a team of people, a moment of at least one person having faith in you that you didn't necessarily have in yourself, and expanding that and having a transformation over time. All of these things we know, resilience, they all contribute to helping our incarcerated people, returning citizens, be productive members of our society, which we want. Thank you so much, Diane, for everything that you shared. I'd love to turn the conversation over to Gary. Gary, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm going to probably change gears here a little bit. I am not a professional in the criminal justice or education. My background is I'm a retired Union Pacific executive. I spent 10 years as a second career in as a drug and alcohol counselor at the Santa Francis House in Omaha. And I'll tell you how this all got started, what I'm doing with Prison Fellowship. I'm not part of Prison Fellowship Academy. That's a year-long separate program. But what I do is I've been running a trauma-based program that's been sponsored by Prison Fellowship at Lincoln Correctional Center. And how that got started was I was volunteering with another group at the York Prison, and was talking to some wonderful women who were taking a trauma class and were just so excited and transformed by what they've learned, and how it's really has truly transformed them. It wasn't a tweak in them. And I knew a lot about that from my previous work, and they demanded that I go to the men's prison and get this started. One of the young ladies there, a black young lady, had her finger wagging in my face, telling me that it's now my responsibility to do that, and I did it. So I hooked up with Prison Fellowship, and we've been running a program over the last 3 years. We got some COVID interruptions, and I think let me just describe it to you. Nebraska programming in the Department of Corrections is struggling. They're struggling because they're really overcrowded. They're struggling because they're really understaffed. And also, a lot of their programs are what you would call cognitively based programs. And a cognitive program is, we're going to assume there's something wrong with your thinking, and then we're going to correct your thinking, and everything will be okay. That's not the problem. If you start with cognitive, it's not the problem. But what a lot of the new and more modern research by a number of academics and researchers are saying that the problem is that our incarcerated citizens are basically traumatized children. We've got maybe 8%, and I had a couple in class that didn't do too well, of sociopaths. But the other 90% or 95% have done really well, and what they are is traumatized children. So what the program that we run is highly emotive and not cognitive at all, and it's had just phenomenal success. Let me just describe what we do real briefly. I don't want to take too much of your time, but basically, we ask them to develop the participants, and we usually have 10 or 12. We're very fortunate to have unbelievable support from Lincoln Correctional Center. That's where I do it, at Lincoln Correctional Center. The associate warden, Sarah Nelson, is a visionary in doing this, and goes way out of her way to support it. But anyhow, we ask them to identify their developmental trauma. I don't know if any of you heard of a thing called ACEs. It's called Adverse Child Experiences, where guys take this instrument and they get scored between 0 and 10. Anything over 4 is somewhat problematic. I've had 10s, I've had 9s, I've had 7s. Almost all the guys in the class have pretty high ACE scores. And let me just read to you real quickly some of the impacts of a high ACE score and some of the impacts of trauma and how difficult it can be if you've had severe developmental trauma. And I'm talking physical, sexual, and emotional abuse oftentimes. I had one the other day who, his father was a sexual abuser and took his own children to watch. This is how bad this is the trauma that our population has. And that's maybe one of the outliers, but it's not unusual. The impact is trauma is you disassociate from yourself and lose your sense of gut feelings. You stop trusting yourself, stop believing in yourself. You disassociate from others and you create walls. Trauma distorts our view of the world in a negative way. the wounds of trauma, and that's what trauma means. It's an emotional wound. It's an emotional wound that you take inside, and you start thinking differently because you took it inside. And emotional trauma, wounds of trauma, causes lifelong pain unless it's healed. Or as my friend Charlie says, what I say to Charlie, says, Charlie, what happens if you don't deal with your trauma? He says, my shit goes sideways. Trauma impacts how our brains develop. Trauma results in a shame-based view of self. And trauma makes it difficult to be present because the pain of the past is constant. We keep reacting to the past. Anything that resembles the past will result into reacting to what happened. So what we do is, it's a very different kind of deal. We're not asking these guys to learn anything in particular. It's not about running faster, jumping higher, learning more. It's about unloading some of the pain and some of the trauma that they've had throughout their life. What trauma causes is what's the cycle has been. These guys grew up with so much trauma. They acted out so much developmental trauma when they were growing up. Then they go and act it out. They act it out, and they go, oh, I guess I was right. I'm not worth a damn. There's something wrong with me. There's something missing. And in their case, they get put in a cage, and then they have to deal with the trauma of prison. So we take the most traumatized people in our society, and we put them in a cage and continue to traumatize them. Not a formula for success, what I say. So what you get when you have a lot of trauma, what you get is a thing called a lot of shame. And shame is the self-judging the self as not being as good as, being something wrong with me, being less than. And shame's always a lie. Shame's always a lie because there's really nothing wrong with them. So the process is to have these fellas, as simple as it seems, tell their story with their own hearts, surrounded by their compassionate friends. I didn't start doing this in prison until 3 years ago, and I was somewhat skeptical whether the guys would be vulnerable enough to do this, whether the guys would be courageous enough to be vulnerable enough to do this. I'm blown away. I'm doing a class in PC now at LCC, and these guys, I've never seen a group, and another one in the mental health group, I've never seen a group more willing to get better, more willing to take the risk to get better, and to tell their story with their whole heart to each other. And what they do is they create bonds within that. We're trying to create a trauma community within LCC, where the guys can get together without the facilitators. I have some co-facilitators that help me. So it's been amazingly successful. We've got a number of ambassadors, the guys that have taken the class that are just running around the prison trying to get their buddies into the group. When we have a new group, we never have a waiting list. We're always well received. And I think in terms of the future, because of the visionaries at LCC, I think we're going to, they're building a new facility down there. There's some expansion. And we're going to see if we can make LCC almost a trauma-based prison, a trauma-informed prison, a trauma-educated prison. If you want to see any research on this, I use a Stephanie Covington program that's evidence-based that's published by Hazelton. And there's a group, it's a national group called the Compassionate Prison Project that's run by a lady by the name of Frissy Horseman out in LA. I've talked to her a bunch of times. She's a lot better at publicizing things certainly than I am, and she's quite a PR person. In terms of what they've done in terms of real content, I think is in front of them. but it's a new approach. It's something that, to my knowledge, other than the York program, hasn't been done. But had some amazing success. I mean, the men that I've met, some of them have been really filled with despair, filled with suicidal ideations, filled with depression. They're not bad guys, they're broken guys. There's nothing wrong with them. It's some stuff that happened to them. It's really good work. And it's just, that's my description of it. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. There's so much of what you just shared with us that we could expand on. I do want to make it clear that we are going to be having a panel discussion about restorative justice, which is essentially what you just described. And so restorative justice is an old practice. It's not actually claimed by any organizations and no person has developed it or whatnot. I would say it is relatively new in terms of that the United States has been very slow to embracing alternatives to incarceration, and restorative justice is the alternative to incarceration. People who have committed acts of violence have a story behind the act of violence. And one of the myths in our American culture is that people snap. That's a myth. Homicide is years and years and years in the making. And so I just appreciate you bringing the ACEs to our conversation. I feel like it's the conversation of the moment to talk about trauma, because that is the truth. There are estimates that about 95% of our incarcerated population has experienced complex trauma, which is, as you described, multiple ACEs, which vastly is higher than the majority of our population on the outside who never experiences incarceration. And we did have Sarah shared The Wisdom of Trauma. That's a recent documentary that came out. I would also like to offer Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. That's helpful for anyone, whether you've experienced incarceration or not. Really talks about how we hold on to trauma in our physical. And as Gary mentioned, we react as if this thing that was happening 15 years ago is happening right now in this moment. Hence a lot of violence that happens. So thank you, Sarah, for sharing the link for that in the chat. And we did have a question, Gary, that I want to toss your way. So Linda asks, if someone was incarcerated, but did not get this help while they were inside and now they're released and they're living in Lincoln, is there a place where they could receive this type of trauma work, this type of help?
I think there's some counselors that are probably that do work in this area. Many counselors don't, because it's some of the hardest work that a counselor can do. When we do the work with the guys, we're not standing above them. We're, so to speak, in the sewer pipes with them, and because some of the stuff they're dealing with is sewer pipes. So it's hard work for a counselor. Some of them some will do it, and some are unwilling to do it. But right now, the work we're doing is directly for the guys at LCC. And that's where it's been so far. And we're going to try to expand it pretty broadly within LCC over the next couple of years, hopefully.
Excellent. Thank you. And I do see we have a couple more questions coming in, but they are a little more general. I'd love to toss them to all of our panelists. So let's save them for the end. Thank you, Gary, for sharing with us. I'd love to move to our final panelist of the evening. Last but not least, of course, Cory, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate the opportunity, guys, to be involved with this. This is something that is kind of near and dear, and to more or less resonate what Gary had to say. I'm not a professional. What I am is an advocate and a person who lives a life filled with empathy. So what we have started here is something that is near and dear to my heart. So I would like to share some slides here. I hope that I can do that. Let's get this up and we'll share that. Hope everybody is able to see this. So this is who we are, the Stonecatchers Society. Our group is small right now, but mighty. Our dreams are new, but they're big. And what our pillars are, as you can see on this first slide, is to prevent, promote, and to protect. And before I get started, really what I see us all as, the Stonecatcher Society, is something that really can be a tool for any and all of the panelists and the organizations that they're affiliated with, that are on here tonight. So with that, I'll get started. So what is a Stonecatcher? It is a person who defends the downtrodden, speaks up for those who cannot speak, and seeks fellowship with all. Our goals are to prevent unnecessary incarceration, promote educational, entrepreneurial, and wellness opportunities, and protect the rights of the accused and convicted. We have some initiatives that are directly correlated with our pillars, and those are as follows. Go back one slide here. Our preventative actions. We'd like to instill a bond program to provide and post bond money for detained individuals. We'll likely look for some affiliated organizations who have some background in that to help facilitate that. Our legislative agenda is to provide legal representation for individuals accused of nonviolent crimes, such as drug possession, theft, weapons possession, and that kind of gets a little bit gray. We can expand on that later if necessary. Our promotional actions are under education, to send educational books and magazine subscriptions to inmates. Entrepreneurial, our end goal or our future goals, one of them, is to award entrepreneurial grants currently or formerly incarcerated individuals, which would be applicable to advertising, licensing, insurance, etc. More or less just helping people who want to do better for themselves gain access to those monies to help them succeed. And then wellness. Our idea is to award wellness credits to formerly incarcerated individuals and or currently incarcerated individuals' families that would be applicable to health services, which contribute to overall personal wellness. And then our protective practices that we would like to see go forward would be legal representation, which would be partnering with like-minded legal partners in the pursuit of true justice. Public engagement is something that we think is one of the biggest things that we can really do as a grassroots effort. And that's to initiate the public's participation in submitting Bible letters, petitions, any suits that may pertain to sensible criminal justice reforms. And then obviously we really and truly believe that we need to advocate for the complete restoration of the fundamental and constitutional rights of current and formerly incarcerated individuals. So we actually already had our first event as an organization. And to give you a little bit of background, we became recognized by the state of Iowa and Nebraska earlier this year, actually, with COVID over 2020. It took a little bit longer than we had expected. But in May, we had our first event, and that was the Stonecatchers Book Crusade. And so what this was not quite a book drive in the traditional sense. What we did was we looked to gain donations, and through that, it was something that we wanted to educate and empower individuals that are currently incarcerated. And we raised over $4,000 on our first event, and that will go to books for over 60 inmates for this first round. And the materials that they were able to choose from were hand selected with a focus on education and personal development. So we had somebody facilitate from the inside, say, hey, if you guys are interested, this is what I've got a team of people doing on the outside, and they want to help you. And that's exactly what we did is we raised that money And most of the awareness that we put out on this first round was facilitated through social media. We also have a website, which I'll share. And then we had flyers and posters posted throughout our local community and around the outlying metro area. We do have a event coming up at the end of July, which is a golf tournament. So it's just a 4-person scramble, and any and all of the funds raised are going towards our initiatives. So the tournament, for anybody interested, I think most of the teams have probably filled up by now, but we'd love to see any new faces that have like minds. It's over in Shelby County, Iowa, small little golf course north of Harlan, Iowa, off 59. I'll give you guys some opportunities to contact us if I can provide any more information after this in a later slide. And then tentatively, we're looking to host a social, which would also include an auction and some other events. And that would be at the venue at the Highlander in Omaha. Again, that's tentative, kind of based on, current practices and COVID protocols. And then closing thoughts, something that's been top of mind for us first and foremost is, kind of our opposition to the proposed new prison. And, the reason being is because of our pillars. We feel that there is work to be done beneath before building above. So, facilities that focus on rehabilitation, instilling those programs, finding the funding for those programs, community engagement and education, employment and wellness opportunities for those most likely to be affected by the system. And then again, community engagement and education. So what we found is that there are many people, which, for the better, that have little or no exposure to the criminal justice system. And we want to help enlighten or bring light to some of these issues through some of the writings that are put out on the website, and also the advocacy efforts with our stakeholders going forward. So I'll leave this up here for just a little bit. We've got several different ways to contact us. We've got the website there. There's a Gmail affiliated with the website, and then I provided my personal email address too. Please feel free to jot that down. Just if you want to make a connection, drop a note. If you think you can help and get involved and want to, pursue a further involvement within some of these activities, we'd be happy to hear from you. And then I also included our founders' information. A brother of mine, maybe not by blood, but certainly in spirit, that as his time within those walls has lapsed, or not quite lapsed, I guess, but gone on, he has seen these things firsthand and really wanted to make a point that he feels that there's more that the system can do for those in there, whether that's education programs or access to books or access to, whatever information for those who really want to try and better themselves. And then also to produce outlets for them to maybe talk about their issues, as some others have alluded to. So I felt it was important to include his information. And then lastly, thank you really to everybody on the panel tonight, everybody joining us via Facebook and any of those watching this recording in the future. We appreciate your concern, your empathy, and your want to see change. And we want to be a tool to help facilitate that change. So, this was a little bit promotional, maybe, but at the same time, I really do believe that we can be a tool for any one of the programs that the panelists have talked about tonight, and that's our goal in the future, and that's what we will be doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Cory. So your information is also going to be sent in a follow-up email. Ashley's going to send to all of the attendees who registered. So if you did not catch Cory's information, do not worry. It will come your way. And Cory, before we move into the Q&A, I would love to ask you, you started out by saying that this is very near and dear to you. That
Yep.
sounds to me like a personal connection, or, I would love if you'd be comfortable with sharing, like, why is this so near and dear to your heart?
Yeah. So the founder, as I kind of alluded to, has been a very, very close friend of mine for the past decade, at the very least. We've known each other since we were kids, but really found our groove as to, future plans and kind of things that we wanted to do as we grew older, in our early 20s. And he absolutely has been a brother to me. And there was an unfortunate situation that happened that he now finds himself incarcerated. And so through that, and just the understanding of the bond that we shared outside of those walls, I have made it an absolute point in my life to continue that, and have found very good cause to promote and to continue this vision that he has, and to really bring it to fruition. And it's just something that is the right thing to do. Learning more and more about the prison system, and it kind of alludes to the community education, because I've been a part of that community education through this journey, and I couldn't be more thankful for it, because there are too many stigmas out there. And there are some writings on the website that I shared that kind of go into that, and it's this trust circle that some people have. And Gary kind of alluded to it, that oftentimes it's a box of one inside that circle. There's no circle. It's just a singular person. So gaining a perspective on what a lot of those individuals are going through has really driven home the point that there is a real need for change, and that these people and any people in the future need to have outlets, need to have other avenues instead of the life that they've lived, to continue to move forward and to understand why they may feel the way that they do, and then to work towards a new, better life. Because my guarantee is that the majority of the population doesn't want to continue what they've done, but it might be what they've known or been kind of fed to think that that's all that there is. When we've got someone on the panel tonight that has proved the exact opposite. And Diane, your story is enlightening, and one that I think that can resonate with a lot of people if found the right audience. So I appreciate you sharing.
Beautiful. Thank you, Cory. Thank you so much for sharing that. If you could just stop sharing the slides so while we move into the Q&A, so everybody can see everyone. Thank you. And
Yep.
I just want to name that what you are talking about is that for so long, the people behind the walls are an invisible population. They, as Angela Davis says, right, they disappear human beings. The prisons just disappear our people. And your brother, your chosen brother, so to speak, is somebody that you know and you love and you care about, and he is more than the worst moment of his life. And that's not to dismiss the seriousness of potentially of what happened. I don't know his story, but for anyone who's incarcerated, who has committed violence or anything serious, it's not to dismiss the survivors of those crimes, but it's to talk about how the people inside are also brothers and fathers and husbands and mother, of course, all genders across the board, but they play roles in the lives of other people. They're not just meant to be locked away in a cage and forgotten about in a black hole where we don't ever look at them. And thank you, Cory, so much for sharing all that information. So moving into our Q&A, Jason, you are being so gracious. I will continue the dialogue here. Our first question tonight, and we're going to do this, whatever panelist feels compelled to jump in. I just want to open it to the four of you. So Megan asked, You mentioned that cognitive behavioral therapy, and I believe this was a comment from Gary. You mentioned that CBT approaches are not the most ideal intervention in the criminal justice system. This is very interesting since most of the considered best practices are CBT based for this population. In your opinion, what is the most effective intervention for trauma-informed work within the criminal justice system? And more importantly, how do you educate criminal justice systems and get their buy-in for these interventions? So this is a large question. It was kind of directed at Gary, but I do want to open it up to the other panelists. So maybe Gary, you could jump us off on
Sure, I'll take a shot at it. I think more of the modern research, people by Claudia Black, Stephanie Covington, and Gabor Mate are showing that that emotive therapy and the kind of work that I'm doing is probably the best practice for trauma-based work. Cognitive behavioral therapy makes the assumption there's something wrong with your thinking. My experience with the guys that I've worked with, there's nothing wrong with their thinking. Their thinking is sharp. But what happens when strong emotion meets strong thinking, strong emotion always seems to win. And dealing with those strong emotions created by trauma works. Most of the programming in Nebraska prison system is cognitive. And I think that's unfortunate. That's my opinion, but that's all I can say about that.
Thank you, Gary. Dustin, Diane, Cory, do you have any thoughts about CBT versus trauma-informed therapies for our incarcerated people?
So I will just say, I'm not a clinician. However, we understand our entire team at the college at 180 RAP is trained in trauma-informed peer support. So I understand the value of it. I appreciate it. However, on another vein, we also do provide cognitive behavioral interventions. So the thing is, I know that we use trauma-informed care with every single person that we interact with, whether inside the prison or at the reentry center. So,
Dustin?
I would just say, so yeah, you said something that kind of really caught me, Gary, when you said working toward a trauma-informed prison, and I just can't even imagine it because that is so oxymoronic to think about, just because of the incubator that prisons are, and but I mean, I think it's a valiant effort. I know, like with restorative justice, when organizations try to have restorative justice programs in prisons, the punitive nature they run the people out almost, from what I've read. And so here's the thing though, I also know that in the Inside Out class that I was in, like probably a third of the other future facilitators were criminal justice professors. So if criminal justice professors are teaching future prison employees, maybe they'll eventually work themselves out of a job and everything, and it'll be community centered restorative justice.
I can't help but jump in. I just want to say thank you, because what you all just put out there is the complexity of this issue. So a couple of things to know. All psychological research supports that what facilitates change in a therapeutic relationship is the relationship between the person who is practicing and the clinician, right? And so as Diane mentioned, there's not one pathway to recovery. Psychological research supports this. And also Dustin has brought up the very complicated issue that from a prison abolitionist standpoint, we abolish prisons, that's how people heal. And we find alternatives to incarceration through healing. And at the same time, to Gary's point, Gabor Mate is an amazing person. You should look him up. He wrote Hungry Ghosts, which is about addiction and sort of the hole in the soul, and how he believes that at the root of all violence is trauma reactions. And we'll talk more about restorative justice, Dustin. I don't want to open up that door right now, but please come in and hang out with us for that panel, because I was inside doing restorative justice, and I'd love to share like what actually helps restorative justice work inside versus outside. What are the pitfalls? What do we know doesn't work, and what does work, and how can we facilitate that process inside? So, okay, I've talked a lot. Next question, also from Megan, actually, is what would be the first step in this philosophical change for correctional employees? Does anyone on the panel have any advice on how to get that started?
So I think that's it's obviously loaded. All these questions will be loaded, but it comes a lot with the approach that we just got done talking about, and that's I think the vein that we're trying to hit on is empathy, and not an us versus them mentality, but one that is truly about rehabilitation and what can be done to help, and what are your interactions like on a day-to-day. And I think that is a really big thing, and trying to instill a trust factor as well. So, you know, kind of some vague concepts there, but I really think it all kind of circles around some of that. Personal opinion.
Thank you, Cory. Diane? No, no. Empathy is where it's at. Thank you, Cory, for sharing that. And I do think that tribalism is probably one of the most toxic things that the human species encounters, and that us versus them, no matter what setting you're in, it's very detrimental.
I'll throw something out of that. Had a kind of a unique experience in that regard. Number one, the training needs to be, trauma training needs to be added to the correctional officers training, number one. But after a little while ago, Sarah Nelson, the associate warden at LCC, asked me to give a presentation to the senior management team, maybe 50 people at LCC, on what we were doing, because she's a huge supporter of it. And I finished, and they were all looking at their shoes, and there were no questions. And I went, wow. I was back the next day doing the class, and I ran into the other ward assistant warden. And she says, that was a really good presentation. I said, well, you could have fooled me. I didn't get any questions. She says, oh, they weren't going to talk about that in that group. She says, they're all traumatized working in a prison. That's what she told me. So we got some work to do. The next step that we're going to try at LCC is not not go for the whole prison, but to go for a cell block. We're working on getting a whole cell block involved in this, which includes staff training and guest training.
Thank you, Gary. Dustin, you came off mute.
Yeah, so I know I think I've read, I don't know if I've experienced it, but I know that sometimes correctional officers are, I don't know if jealous is the right word, but they don't like the fact that free education is occurring. And so I've also known where there's at least one school that the correctional officers, some of them are getting college credit as well simultaneously with the students who are incarcerated. So I think that would be a really a good opportunity where, you know, I suppose that funding is provided for the correctional officers as well. And so they are working together to solve these complex problems, you know, which would work. They would then be essentially on the same team. So, you know, to some extent, could.
Exactly. Trauma-rich environment. It is not natural to keep human beings in cages. It is even more unnatural to put a group of people in charge of watching people in cages. And all of the experiences that incarcerated people have, the correctional officers are also having. And so, it's like, where's the trauma-informed like practice for us has been something that people have said. And again, my shameless plug for the restorative justice panel, we'll talk about restorative justice practices with correctional officers and how that has changed their perception of RJ inside. So 2 questions from Gregory. Would the panelists please comment on 1, the effect of sentence duration, and 2, the reduction of prison mail to copies only? I'll open the floor.
Is everybody aware what he's referring to, the copies? So they're taking out regular mail and they're making photocopies, for anybody that's not aware of that, and you're just getting photocopies of everything.
Thank you for that clarification, Jason. Yes.
Well, I would just say that I can't even write and receive letters because I'm a volunteer. So I think that's really problematic, because if you're trying to build a community of support, then you differentiate roles like that, and so we can't receive emails or letters or anything. It just so.
Yes, there's a lot of barriers to keep the communities separate. So if you're a volunteer, if you're an employee, there's all sorts of rules in all the different states that govern this. Cory, I'm dying to know your experience, since you have someone inside that you're communicating with regularly.
Yeah, so the vast majority of our communication has been done both via email through JPay, which, as you all know, goes through the intel and has to be looked at. So, which the invasion of privacy is inherent to incarceration. But then there becomes this issue of trust. Is this really what was sent to me? Was it edited in any sort of way? Which I can see that being very much the same in terms of getting photocopies. And then another thing is that somebody's handwritten letter to you, that ink to the paper is so very personal and sentimental, that it takes away a little bit of that and almost takes away the realness, right? So that is something that I think would affect the psyche very quickly in seeing that you're not getting that handwritten, that pen to paper. And then, to hit on the duration of prison sentences, I see them all being very arbitrary. I rhyme or reason, I'm not sure that there really is one as I kind of venture into this journey. It's just multiples of 5 a lot of times. So the duration, to me, it's arbitrary. They're made up. I mean, they're man-made sentences at the end of the day. Whether or not we've really delved into the idea of, is this the right amount of time? Is any amount of time the right amount of time? I think there's a lot to be said to that, and it's beyond my pay grade, I will say that.
Thank you, Cory. Would anyone else like to jump in about the duration of sentencing?
They're way too long.
Yeah. So this is one of my niche issues, right? So I'm a public speaker for ending life sentencing, and I don't want to take up too much time. I would just say that there is no evidence, you won't ever find it, that supports that life sentencing does anything for public safety or recidivism. And so if we're actually caring about public safety, then life sentences do nothing for that. And therefore, as Cory just beautifully said, it is a man-made arbitrary sentence that we have decided that rather than execute someone, we'll just execute them long-term in a cage and wait until they die. So moving on, because we are running short of time. So we have an anonymous question. We often focus on changing behaviors instead of providing incentives. In fact, there is some level of pushback for funding certain incentives for clients because it is felt that these are expected behaviors and should not be rewarded. Yes. Does anyone on the panel have any creative ideas for incentives within the criminal justice system? We seem to give out more sanctions than incentives, and I believe it should be the other way around. Thoughts?
So I'm going to take this one. I have thought about this many, many, many times because I agree with that. You know, they have the misconduct reports and, you know, the violations that, but what about the people that are completing programming, that are volunteer or taking part in voluntary programming through prison fellowship or UNO or MCC, because those are not mandated programming. What about the people that are involved in chapel or religious services or recovery, whatever, really investing in themselves? There should be some sort of incentive system. I've thought about reduction in sentencing. I've thought about, you know, making sure that they're transitioning to a lower facility. They'd never go for it, but, you know, sending them to WAC or one of the state work release centers or releasing them or something. I think that the parole board does a great job of taking into consideration the other things that they are doing in their programming when they're considering release. But I understand too that their hands are tied by that sentencing structure too. So I think it would have to come at the point of sentencing, that there was an opportunity for them to be released sooner. But I think that would be an obvious one. An obvious incentive is an earlier release date. Just dreaming.
Oh, I'll dream with you, Diane. Excellent points. Thank you. I just want to reiterate, actually, one of my team members reminded me, this is why it takes a team to run this. We are going to have a panel discussion about sentencing reform on August 10th. So please join us for that. We'll dive deep into life sentencing in that. So as we wind down here, I want to make sure to grab this last Q&A for the moment, an important one though. So with visits now going to telephone and not physical, how has that affected incarcerated people, family relationships, parent-child relationships, etc.? Would anyone like to share about that?
Since nobody's talking, I will say just experientially the amount of visits I had, which were very limited during my period of incarceration, which was not a short one. Those were very critical times for me to be able to bond with not just my family or my children, but with somebody else that wasn't incarcerated, or somebody else that wasn't making me do a strip search or telling me to do something. It was connecting to society. So, I mean, I don't even know how that's going to long-term damage souls in prison. I can't even wrap my head around it really, but I know it is critical.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Diane. And I think that the touching on the letters, the visits, these are everyday interactions that we all take for granted in our lives. And when you can't have them anymore, Cory so, beautifully articulated about the pen to paper and that personal feeling. So think about your child making a card for you and getting a photocopy of it, as opposed to the actual card. So just like, that's one of those images that I think is just really stands out when you try to communicate to people the impact of these types of policies for our incarcerated people. So as we wind down, our next panel conversation, I just want to promote really quick, is going to be on July 27th. And we're going to be talking and focusing on youth in our incarcerated settings. Hope that you all will join us. Do we have any closing thoughts from any of the panelists? Obviously, we want to say thank you for being here. One last shout out from anybody. That's okay. I appreciate Diane, by the way, saying like nobody's talking, so she jumps in. That's me. So I'm always there. So
I want to jump in to say thank you so much, Prashani, for doing this. It's been amazing. And we were one speaker down, as I'm sure some people might have noticed, but it has not impacted at all. Thank you so much to everyone, including Prashani, for everyone's input. And it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Cory.
Well, I just wanted to say, I just appreciate the platform. It's very encouraging to know that there are like minds out there that feel very similar and that are working towards the same goals. So I appreciate each and every one of you for doing what you're doing. It's opened my eyes so much more, and I look forward to connecting with you all.
Great. And on that note, we encourage all of our attendees, reach out, get in contact, don't hesitate. You think you don't have something to bring to the table? I promise you, you do. Your opinions matter, your voices matter, your feelings matter. There is work for millions of us in this. End mass incarceration. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight.